How's it going, all of you super sleuth soul hacker detectives? Spencer Presley here with a brand new video talking all about, yeah, you guessed it, soul hackers one last time, at least for this week. So, one of the things I've been wanting to talk about a lot, but I really wanted to put my detective hat on and actually dig up some info, find out what I could, and really make sense of this whole soul hacker situation from the perspective of Nintendo Switch fans. So when Atlus ended up announcing Soul Hackers 2, one of the biggest questions everyone was saying was, why isn't it on Switch? If it's on everything but Switch, there's gotta be some reason, right? Well, one of the funniest things about it was I'd seen a lot of people online, Twitter, etc., YouTube, people just talking about it, and what was so funny was a lot of it was like, oh, it has to be on purpose, or oh, it's because they don't want to put it on Switch. And it's like, there's nothing this company's ever done that would say that they don't want to have something on one specific platform for a reason. You could maybe make an example for Xbox, but hey, it's on Xbox now. So, first things first. Atlus does not hate Nintendo Switch. Atlus doesn't hate any platform. They've published on platforms popular and unpopular for as long as they've existed as a company. Just look at Atlus's support of the Switch in terms of Nocturne, TMS, SMT5, Persona 5 Strikers, and so on. Now let's actually look and dive a little bit deeper. Let's say, alright, we're being critical. Some of those games weren't made by Atlus, they were just published by Atlus. Okay, so Atlus currently has two games they've developed internally on the Switch, themselves at Atlus. SMT5, which released in November of 2021, and Tokyo Mirage Sessions Sharp FE Encore. That was obviously published by Nintendo, but the original and the Switch version were made at Atlus. So what this is telling us is that it's not like there aren't dev kits. Atlus is more than capable of making something on the Switch, but we have to remind ourselves that context is very important as well as size and scope. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are looking at the footage of Soul Hackers 2 and see it is clearly not Shin Megami Tensei 5. It is clearly not Persona 5. But another thing to kind of really put into perspective is this is a new outing for this company. This is something that a large group of people believe in, and honestly, for me, I would say this is one of Atlus's most interesting and kind of risky ventures they've made in a really, really long time, because it's not even got the title of Devil Summoner. It doesn't have SMT. It's not anything. They're not selling this as from the makers of Persona on it. This is very much, hey, we are trying to bring back Soul Hackers. We're making it its own thing. We're obviously paying heavy homage to previous Atlus games and Soul Hackers 1, but we are making this its own standalone thing after 25 years. And one of the interesting things I noticed in an interview about Soul Hackers 2, producer and director Ishida and Harada were talking about the scope of this game compared to Tokyo Mirage Sessions. And after their work on TMS, they had both said, hey, if we were ever to do another really big game again, we would have to work on it together as producers and directors. That's why they share that title, because Atlus is not a big company. I've joked about this many times, but it's very, very true. Sega to a less extent, but Atlus more so especially, is not a very big company. They make big games, but they are not all like multi-million sellers and stuff for it. Just take Shin Megami Tensei 5 as an example. That was a huge step forward in terms of sales and recognition, and that sold less than 1 million in 2 months, which for Atlus is great, but for other companies, like if that was a Square Enix game, that would be considered a failure probably, even though it was a system exclusive. So Atlus, it is important to remember, is always working on a smaller budget, especially if it's not something mainline. If you're not in mainline Persona, or if you're Sega, if you're not Yakuza, you're not going to be getting millions and millions and millions of dollars, let alone thousands of employees to work on these titles. Now, important to remember, we don't know who the actual production team is. It is very heavily speculated and would make a lot of sense that it is the team behind Tokyo Mirage Sessions working on this, but it has not been confirmed. We don't know how many studios are involved, let alone support studios. But that being said, the way this game has been talked about is that this is a big step up for them as a team, and the directors and the producers and everyone involved are very all hands on deck on making this work because it is such a big project for them. Now, what makes a game even more complicated than just designing it and making it release in general is the fact that when you're porting a game to other systems, even though everything is a lot more unified now than it was back in, let's say, the PlayStation 2, Xbox era, is that when you're releasing it on one platform, that's already got to be tough. When you're releasing something and it is a worldwide release, so you're making sure English is ready day one, the same day that it's ready in Japanese, French, Spanish, etc., that's already challenging. They already have that all up against them. Adding on top of that even more, you're now releasing this on PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, Xbox Series S, Xbox Series X. Yes, those are different platforms. And PC through Windows Store and Steam. That is a huge amount of things to be taking on internally, and a lot of people aren't really talking about the fact that this is an internal Atlus project that is their first PS5 game. It is their first Xbox One produced game. It is their first Xbox Series console game, and it is their first in-house PC port. This is a lot of firsts for them, for a game that they're bringing back that's not guaranteed to be a huge hit. And another thing with it, you might just say, well, why not just focus on the Switch instead of all those other platforms, is it's important to give creative freedom and a lot of liberty. And one of the things I've noticed while talking to people at Atlus in the back has been a big push for this game has not only been to bring back Soul Hackers as its own franchise, but to also make this a graphically impressive game. They didn't want to be limited. They didn't feel like it was necessary after having worked on Tokyo Mirage Sessions to be like, hey, let's stick to the lowest common denominator. It's like, hey, let's also make this our first 4K game. Let's make this run on a crazy powerful next-gen system. Like, let's really go wild with this thing. Obviously, would it being on all systems be awesome? Yes. But while that's always the answer for most cases of, hey, the more systems the merrier, and that will never not be true for any game, the realistics are you have to think of people to not only port it to those systems, but also afford the man hours to make that work. Is that going to be an in-house port? Who's bringing it to Switch? Is that going to affect development? Like, if something came up to them and they were like, okay, if we bring this onto Switch, this is going to add 6 more months onto development. Should we just push this to January 2023 and make it release on all of those platforms? They're looking at their projects. They know there's not a mainline Persona game that's coming out this year. There's not a mainline S&T that's coming out this year. This is their big project, so they're looking at it and like, hey, we need something to come out this year, so let's just put it on all of the home consoles and PC for now and go from there, which honestly, for me, makes perfect sense. And I think a lot of people aren't really realizing the fact that just because it's not on Switch now doesn't mean it's never going to come on Switch. Look at something like Catherine Full Body. That came well after its initial release on PlayStation 4 and Vita. That Switch port was handled by an outside studio who did a fantastic job on the port. It was handled well, and it didn't affect the sales negatively just because it was on the Switch, not at launch. It was one of those things that's like, hey, people who are looking for games on Switch are looking for games on Switch. They're not saying it needs to be there right away. Especially this year. Like, let's be honest, if you're Atlus, do you want to be going up against all of these numerous Nintendo-published RPGs on the Switch this year? Not even getting into the big boys. Like, just look at Live Alive, for example, of a smaller scope game that is still going to be a big game this summer on the Switch only. Look at Xenoblade Chronicles 3 releasing less than a month afterwards. So there's competition there, not only just on the Switch, but especially Switch RPGs. So why not just space that out? Why not just wait, put it out, let's make it look as best and run as well as we can on the PlayStation, Xbox, and PC systems. When everyone playing on the Switch, good news, you all have tons of stuff to play, and even if you don't like anything coming out this year, you literally 4 months ago got Shin Megami Tensei 5, which only released on your platform thanks to funding by Nintendo. Let us not forget why SMT5 was exclusive as well. Nintendo approached Atlus as a partner, and they said, hey, we would love for you to make it exclusive on our system. Unreal with Epic came up to Atlus and they said, hey, if you're making exclusive, we would really like to have a push with Unreal games on the Switch. So they were getting money from both ends, and that was giving a lot of the development team that time and that power to just put it on one system and crank out as much as they could, which is not their MMO. Their MMO is not always to do that, especially nowadays. They've said, even with other ports, like looking at Persona and looking at Persona 5 Strikers, there's a reason Strikers came to PC when it came out in the West. Same with Nocturne HD. They're trying to get it on as many platforms as possible at launch, but they're also being realistic about it. They're not just going to release it on all systems but one because there's some reason. There's no evil conspiracy reason why Ultimax is not on Xbox One. There's no evil conspiracy reason why Nocturne didn't get an Xbox version, or even why Strikers isn't there. It's just, it doesn't make sense financially. There's no one company keeping it from another, so it's really important just to kind of realize It's more of a matter of when and not if for Soul Hackers 2 being on the system. Obviously, you could put it there. Obviously, it's not trying to be an overly graphical powerhouse of a game, but at the end of the day, if you're trying to get this game to release this year, I think August is a great month for release on all of those platforms except Switch. And I think if you just told people, hey, 12 to 15 months from August, the game will be on Switch, I am sure they will still buy it there anyway, because if you were going to play it on Switch and you can only play it on Switch, you're still probably going to want Soul Hackers 2 in 2023, even if you don't get it in 2022. Now, one last comparison I want to make, because I've seen this pop up a lot about Switch sales are being so critical, and it's kind of like, oh, Sega is making this mistake again. Last year, Demon Slayer had a game that was developed by CyberConnect 2, who you may know from the Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm games or Dragon Ball Kakarot. They released a fighting game version of Demon Slayer on PlayStation 4, 5, PC, Xbox One, and Series consoles, and is now coming out next summer on Switch. A lot of people at launch were like, where was Demon Slayer on Switch? It wasn't going to sell that well because it's not on Switch. And using specifically Japanese-only data as a reason for why Demon Slayer hadn't performed as well in Japan as expected. There's two interesting notes that I haven't seen a lot of people bring up for that. Number one, Sega actually didn't publish Demon Slayer in Japan. Demon Slayer in Japan is actually published by Aniplex, not Sega. Sega only handled the Western publishing, and if you actually look at the physical copies of Demon Slayer in the West, all copies specifically say, for Western use only, do not sell in Japan, because Aniplex wants to make their money their way, and Sega can make money for them in other countries, but they want it to be very clear that one is for Japanese audiences and one is for Western audiences outside of Japan. So Sega has no real say in terms of what was happening with which platforms were going where, and a large part of it that CyberConnect has actually talked about before, not really super publicly, but they've definitely talked about it, is like, hey, developing these games that look this good and using our engines can run on the Switch, but it takes a lot of time. That's why you've seen ports so late, like Dragon Ball came out many, many months afterwards. That's why you look at the Naruto Storm games, came out many months afterwards. Even looking at stuff like with Namco Bandai and the Dot Hack ports, like that PlayStation 2 port is finally coming to Switch, not because it couldn't handle it before, but just because it doesn't always make sense in man-hours to have them all ready at launch, even though most people would like all platforms ready at launch. Final little note here, in terms of success. Most people were looking at Demon Slayer not being on Switch sales numbers and then pointing to Soul Hackers 2 as saying, oh, it's not going to sell well in Japan, which means it's not going to sell well anywhere. There's a huge thing you're fighting there. With Demon Slayer specifically, Demon Slayer sold huge and has had amazing legs because of Demon Slayer's rising popularity around the whole world on home platforms. It's actually sold the weakest in Japan and has had a huge following on PlayStation and Xbox and on Steam with PC. It's been a game that just sold very, very well and continues to sell well because they were promoting the game along with Season 2, so they had a lot of momentum coming off of the Demon Slayer movie in between Season 2 launching and so on. So just because it's not on Switch doesn't mean it can't sell very well. Now obviously I'm very aware Soul Hackers 2 is not going to sell Demon Slayer numbers. Now this is mostly just a comparison of just because it's not on the Switch doesn't mean it's not going to sell well, because people are really discrediting PC having Soul Hackers at launch is going to be a really, really big dividing factor, because a lot of Atlus fans are already going to check it out because they're established on PlayStation. So people like me who enjoy their games with trophies on PS4 or PS5, we're already in. We're not going to jump tail unless you're a weirdo like me who's like, whoa dude, I gotta play this game on Series X because when's the next time Atlus is going to do a Series X game? Most people aren't going to really jump into that, but just because I say most people doesn't mean that there's no one. I know many fans who listen to the Shin Megami Tensei Network podcast who are like, I'm an Xbox fan. I would love to play Atlus games on my Xbox. I've just never had the chance. And because Soul Hackers has been announced, they're all like, oh my god, this is great. I can't wait to buy this. Can't wait to pick it up. So I think a large majority of it should be not, woe is me, why isn't this coming onto Switch? You're sabotaging this release. Should just be like, look at the markets it is releasing on. Look at the time it is releasing on. There's a lot of good opportunity for this game to sell well. And also, it doesn't have to sell all of its lifespan copies of games in the first month. Like, Atlus games usually have a pretty good tale because fans like me talk about it. People have word of mouth to spread it for years and years. That's how Persona 4 Golden became one of the best-selling PlayStation Vita games. It sold more copies through its life as opposed to its first month on sale in 2012 because people just talk about it. People like to recommend these games. It's not always a race. Obviously, most companies want to sell as many copies as humanly possible and realistically sell the most in those first couple of months, but I think when you get into these niche games, these niche genres like JRPGs or games just honestly published by Atlus, it's a different ballpark. You can't really compare everything apples to oranges. So hopefully I made sense and explained a little bit for you that while it stinks it's not coming out at launch, I hope this makes a little bit more sense as to why Soul Hackers 2 is not getting a Switch port right away. It's probably coming eventually, but just take heedance in the fact that the team is busting their butt to get it on as many consoles as possible, and they really want this to be a special, like, next-gen game. Like, they really want to, like, put some effort and make this game shine, and I think we just need to be patient with them. And if you're someone out there who only has a Switch, I understand. That's got to be extremely frustrating for you. But it's one of those things that's like, hey, if that's your situation, I promise you there will be tons of other games you can play and wait. And if you're really excited for Soul Hackers 2 and don't want to wait, don't forget about Tokyo Mirage Sessions, because a lot of people do. That's a great game. We're going to end on a controversial note. TMS, really great Switch game. And Wii U game. Either way, everybody, I've really enjoyed talking about Soul Hackers 2 with you all, and I'm sure I will continue talking about Soul Hackers 2 for the next couple of months until its release in August worldwide. Either way, everybody, have a great rest of your night, and I will see you later for the next video.